Hello, everyone. We're going to see a class about an artist who's Botticelli and another person who is Girolamo Savonarola. He was a priest. So it's a different kind of conflict. It's a different way of looking at art when there are so many other things going on and how they're going to influence or affect the artwork that we're going to see. We're going to try to get all of it in just this class, and I hope I can make it. There's a lot of information, but Botticelli was actually not fashionable during the Baroque period, and not even in the 19th century. Until the late 19th century, Botticelli became a little bit more fashionable. Of course, during the Renaissance, he was very successful, and he died a wealthy man. Actually, there are several theory that maybe he was very poor, but some others say that he was very wealthy and very successful at the end of his career. So let's try and talk about his work, his life, in comparison, of course, with what was going on in Florence, and especially the life of Savonarola. And before that, let me show you this, because of course, this is one of the most important paintings that we know that Botticelli painted, The Birth of Venus. But this one is going on the internet. And during the pandemic, actually, it would go around this woman drinking a soda or something on a wall. And it is the same, of course, representation as The Birth of Venus. There are many others, and I just chose this one because I thought it was really funny. But Botticelli has been going on all over the news, and we have paintings that have been sold and bought. Some of them have been fake, by the way. In the year 2021, this one was sold for $92.2 million. Even though it's a tremendous amount of money, we cannot compare it with paintings by Cézanne or by, well, Da Vinci, of course. But remember, this is an artist who today we cherish as one of the most amazing masters of the Renaissance. So this is one example of some of those portraits that he made during the Renaissance. So this was sold in 2021. And it is framed on a window. He is holding this rondel, or this round painting of a saint. He is painted on this stone edge, the ledge that we see just a little bit of it. And this is usually the way that would be a portrait. This is probably a self-portrait. We're going to talk a little bit about this image because it is part of the representation of the adoration of the Magi. But his full name is Alessandro di Mariano di Vanni Filippei, and he is known as Sandro. Sandro is the nickname, and Botticelli is also a nickname. We're going to talk also about that. He's part of the early Renaissance, the school of Florence, of course, that Giorgio Vasari named that period the Golden Age. And I always refer to Giorgio Vasari because he's going to be the biographer of many of those artists, even though he did not know all of them. He is a later artist. So his masterpieces, of course, mythological subjects like The Birth of Venus and the Primavera, which are at the Uffizi Gallery. Other topics like religious representations, the Sacra Conversazione, many portraits of Simona Vespucci, which we're going to talk also about her. And he had a very large workshop that was specialized in Madonnas and this circular shape, which is called tondo. So he's going to sell many of those paintings, commissions, of course, all of them, by different very important people, especially in Florence. So he lived most of his life in Florence. And he just spent some years out of his native city of Florence in Pisa. And later on, he's also going to be required to paint some panels in the Sistine Chapel, way before Michelangelo. And probably you have seen paintings that are adorning the walls of the Sistine Chapel just before, of course, the ceiling was painted later on. So we have him only signing actually 2 works, but this is the one that is known as the only that is dated, 1500. The rest of his paintings are not signed, They're not dated. We know he painted them, but he had a very large workshop. So he had a lot of assistants that he would be helped with. So this is the only one that we have, and it is in the National Gallery in London. We're going to talk about this one probably if we have enough time. It's called The Mystic Nativity. And we have a whole scholarship about, or scholarly studies about the style, because we don't have dates, we don't have signature, but we do have development of the artist. So by the 1470s, he's an independent master. Remember, they have to be part of a guild. The St. Lucas Guild is the one where the painters are members. Then we have him as his adult or most important period, which we see the Primavera, we see other large mythological paintings, and his best Madonnas are done in a much more personal style later on, I'm sorry. And then he will get into a much more Gothic style, which you will think he goes back to the Middle Ages. But we also know that Leonardo da Vinci, he's more or less a contemporary. He has a completely different style. He's 7 years his junior. So Leonardo da Vinci comes afterwards with a different way of painting. And the development of, especially the way to paint in Florence, and from there every other place in Europe, is from paintings like this, from painters like this, like Masaccio. The development of perspective, how to paint from a focal point, and all of the lines which are derived from it, in a very realistic way to depict the human body. Later, we're going to know that Leonardo da Vinci would make autopsies, and he would just look at the actual bones and muscles of the body. But by this time, they are interested in representing in a natural way, or also representing a space with perspective. And this is an example by Masaccio, which is an earlier artist. This is called the Holy Trinity, and it is in Santa Maria Novella in Florence, of course. Is one of the masterpieces of the early Renaissance. One of the beginnings of Botticelli are, of course, representations of the Virgin and Child. These are mostly commissions by churches, by different institutions, and also powerful families that they want an altar for their houses, for their mansions. But in the style of Botticelli, he's going to be more interested in line. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to understand what do I mean by that. Draftsmanship, drawing, what is called disegno in Italian, and the beautiful Madonnas that he represents, the elegant way of depicting a portrait or an image, a religious image like this one, or the transparency of the gossamer that we have here, that veil that covers part of her shoulders, or the halos that he is going to represent. We see these angel-like figures that he is painting with those I would say like dreamlike visions of idealizations of children or Madonnas as well. But most likely we were going to know that it is a Botticelli because of the line. So he's not using what Leonardo is going to develop later on called sfumato, not at all. There is a limit in the drawing, in the figure. So sfumato will be it comes from smoke, that we don't have any borders. Contrary, no, chiaroscuro is a contrast between shadow and light. Sfumato means that there are no borders. Hazy, but imagine a face, and I did not bring a Leonardo da Vinci or the famous, of course, Mona Lisa, but if you see her hair or her face, it doesn't have a line. It is kind of, I would say, melting or merging the different lines into just a hazy look. Here we have lines all the way through. For example, look at the arm of the baby or the profile of that angel. So there is a line drawn there. It is very poetic, very lyrical. But look at also the detail. We're going to see that all through his career, he's going to be very meticulous. Gold details painted with a very fine brush. And as I mentioned, disegno, which is the design or the drawing that we're going to see all over his career. Now, actually, because he was born in Florence, and we don't know exactly when he was born, but he will stay most of his life in the same neighborhood, by the way. What is this? Okay, not. Okay, so I'm sorry. This is he would be most of his life in this area, which is the neighborhood of Ognissanti. All Saints is translated, but Ognissanti has its own church as well, where he's going to be buried. And also, this whole neighborhood, people knew each other, of course. And he's going to be born in Ognissanti and buried in the church of Ognissanti. So it will come around, of course. He's the youngest of 4 children, and that survived. Remember, there was a lot of children that would die before getting to adulthood. They were all boys. And his name actually derives from little barrel. Botticelli means that, little barrel, because his brother was nicknamed Botticello. Probably he was, I don't know, fat or something, I'm not so sure, but he was a little brother. So it's Botticelli. That's how we know him today. But he is going to become very close to Lorenzo il Magnifico de' Medici, the famous Lorenzo il Magnifico. But still in 1470, we have a document that says his name, Sandro Mariano Botticelli, and he's writing with his signature, or his name is written with his nickname. That's how people are going to know him, even though this is just a nickname. We never would do that in a document today, just put your nickname, but people knew him as Botticelli, and that's how he's going to write his name. His father, his name is Mariano di Amadeo Filippetti, I'm sorry. He was a tanner until 1460. We have a lot of information in Florence because it was a thriving city, and there's a lot of trade. There's documents from purchasing things, or there are purchasing a property. So there is information, documents that tell us a little bit about the family and about the people who live there. We know that he's going to join his son. Actually, the father is going to join his son to have work with gold leaf. Botticelli is going to have that contact with artists because of that. The work that they would do using gold leaf for frames, for also all kinds of decorations and even art is going to get him closer to artists. And he's going to know how to work with gold leaf as well. Again, we see the same source, Giorgio Vasari, the one who talks a lot about all of those artists, but not everything in Giorgio Vasari's biographies is true. Sometimes he exaggerates, but it's the only source that we have that talks about all of those artists during that time. But he says that he was trained as a goldsmith because of that. Well, in the Ognissanti neighborhood, there were workmen, weavers, and some rich families who owned some of the property in that neighborhood. Some of them are bankers, some of them are very wealthy, like the Rucellai, and here we have the coat of arms of the Rucellai family. So we know that they rented a house from the Rucellai family. There's our connections, of course, with the aristocracy. And this is the Palazzo Rucellai, still, of course, in the Ognissanti neighborhood, and by an architect of the Renaissance, Alberti. This is a map of that area of the Ognissanti. We have also documents where his father bought a house in Villanova, and it is today called the Villa della Porcellana. And Sandro is going to have also his workshop in the same place, and he's going to remain there for the rest of his life after he went to Pisa and Rome. And also his brother and his family lived there. Who else lived there is this family Vespucci. Anybody knows anything about the Vespucci family?
Well, this is too far away. Down the hill, the Medici, they are Medici. But
No,
does this have anything to do later on with the Vespers, the motorcycles?
No,
No.
nothing.
Amadeo Vespucci. Amadeo.
More or less. Americo.
Americo.
Remember America? America Vespucci, Americo Vespucci. So that's the one that I was looking for. Very close, very close. Vespucci, of course. And I spoke about Simonetta Vespucci, but Americo Vespucci is the most famous of the Vespucci. Of course, that is why we know today is America, because of this man who traveled to this area, and we know that name because of that. Here we have a painting of him, of course, idolizing this man. But the other very important Vespucci is Simonetta Vespucci, but she was not born Vespucci. Actually, she married Marco Vespucci. That's how we know her. Her maiden name is Cattaneo, but everybody knows her as Simonetta Vespucci. She's going to be the most beautiful woman in Florence, and not only Botticelli is going to paint her, he's going to idolize her, and actually there are poems dedicated to her and a lot of information of how beautiful she was, even though she died very young. The other character in this story is Girolamo Savonarola. He is going to become a Dominican friar. He's going to be a preacher, and he's going to call everybody for renewal. He is against corruption. He's against the powerful Medici, of course, and he's going to denounce all of that clerical corruption and what was happening at the time in Rome as well. So he's going to have a lot of enemies because of that, and he's going to prophesize the coming of the biblical flood and the destruction of the world because they do not behave. They have to come back to behaving. And also, we're going to see how he transforms the life in Florence. So he was born in Ferrara to a wealthy family. He was very well educated. His father was Niccolo di Micelle. His grandfather was very successful, and he was a polymath. He was a physician as well. A polymath means that he knows a lot of things. He's very knowledgeable, but he has different specialties. So his grandfather is the one who's going to educate him directly. And his mother, Elena, she supposedly was from a family, also a very wealthy and influential family from Mantua. So he's the third child of 7 children. So it's a big family, of course, from Ferrara. Botticelli is going to learn to paint from Fra Filippo Lippi. And here we have an image by Lippi of Madonna and Child. That was, of course, something that was fashionable. All of the, as I mentioned, there are many commissions from wealthy families to have a Madonna and Child. And the Medici are the patrons of the Lippi family. The Medici are the wealthiest and probably the most powerful family of Florence at the time. And here we have how Botticelli learned how to paint not only in panel, usually they would use wood panels, but also frescoes on walls. And he would learn the ropes to be a good artist. So Lippi, at the time when he enters his workshop, he was painting this cathedral in Prato, which is a small town very near Florence, and he was trained there. Botticelli is going to be trained in Prato at the beginning. And this is again by Lippi. This is a fresco done there. And then Lippi goes to work in another city, which is called Spoleto. And Botticelli, finally, he is going to become independent. He has his own workshop. He is admitted as an artist in the Guild of San Luca, or San Luke's Guild. And we have him as this young artist trying to make it, of course. Filippo died, and in 1472, Botticelli is going to take Lippi's son, Filippino Lippi. It's very, very similar. Filippo Lippi, and Filippino is the son of Filippo. So he's going to teach his master's son. Okay, that all comes around. And this is a self-portrait of him. One of the first representations that we have is this Madonna in glory with seraphim. The combination of all of those angels surrounding the Madonna, it is monumental in the way that he is portraying the Madonna frontally, but it's not really very different from the rest of the artists that were doing at the time the same kind of depiction. But still, we see a talent in Botticelli's rendition. There's a little bit of sensitivity and angelical figure of the face of the Madonna right here. And she is having this moment with her child. So there is also an intention of showing a real mother in this representation. Look at the face. But always we see still at that time the representation of Jesus Christ as this kind of a deformed baby. Look at the image right here, but you know why is that? Anybody has a clue why do we see this? Because imagine you have to portray a baby, but it's not exactly a baby, it's holy, but it's an adult later on. So how do you put everything together? So it was kind of this confusing way of representing a baby that is not really human. It's a god. So that's why we see so many, and I would say, ugly babies during the Middle Ages and during the Renaissance. And here we have this halo surrounding her of this image of seraphim. Seraphim are the angels of fire. But these are represented, of course, here with wings. So there's no any issue with the way that he's representing her. He represents the angels the way that everybody would do at the time. And he's changing little by little. Madonna and Child with St. John the Baptist. It is a representation already of Botticelli, who is very talented in using his work to represent different textures in the fabric. Look at the different veils that Madonna has on her head, or the probably the representation of the fur that John the Baptist is using. And of course, the combination of a garden. Look how different this one is. It is much more tender, it's much more humanized, or it is much more realistic in the way that a mother would hold a baby. A little different from the other one. He's sitting on her lap. And also look at the halos. The halos are kind of dots. Imagine also, this is something that you don't take from nature. A halo is something that an artist would have to imagine. How would a halo look like? And how do you paint something that is only light? In his representations, they are dots. This is going to change with different artists, how to paint a halo. He gets this commission, a very important commission. And the Tribunale de Mercancía, which are the ones who commissioned this, they wanted to have different artists painting the 7 virtues. These are allegorical figures, of course, and this is strength or fortitude. And this is the only painting that he finished from the 7 virtues. And actually, they commissioned 2 panels, but the other ones is not going to be finished. They wanted to decorate the tribunal hall of the Piazza della Signoria for of course, the Mercancía Tribunale, which are the judges of disputes between Florentine merchants. Very, very powerful people. They want this commission to decorate that. And this is a painting that is done by Botticelli. It's going to be moved, of course, from this place in the 18th century to the Uffizi. It is done with tempera. Tempera is very different from oil painting. At this time, oil is not used in Florence. This is something that is going to come later. Oil is actually being used in the Netherlands, in Brussels as well. I said the Netherlands, but it's also in Belgium. So, so we have that the technique of oil will come later to Florence, and one of the first artists we're going to use it in a detail is Leonardo da Vinci. So by this time we have Botticelli using tempera, which is egg-based, and it is also used with water. So they would sometimes use acetic acid. Acetic acid, for you to know, is vinegar. So we have that most likely they would use water most of the time. So also, they would not use canvas. Usually would have wood as a wooden panel for the base, and they would prime it with gesso. So it will add light. Yes?
Talking about eggs, this is a silly question.
Go ahead.
How many egg yolks do you need to paint that?
I don't know how many eggs. That's a good question. The yolk is the binder. So it depends on how much pigment you're using and how much you're going to dilute it. It means if you need more binder, you put more eggs. But I don't think you need that many, because it's just the binder to put everything together. It's like when you're baking. Like, it depends how much flour you're going to do or how large.
I guess the artist knows how many yolks he'll need.
Yeah, yes, of course. They would know. They would know, of course, because they would teach that in the different workshops. So Filippo Lippi would teach him that. Yes.
color is vibrant and it lasts a long time. I've seen things done like this and doesn't it last a long time?
Okay, there is, the technique is, first of all, they put the gesso, which absorbs part of the tempera, and then they would add a varnish.
Yeah.
So that helps or doesn't help. It depends what kind of varnish they would use. But there have been restorations over the years for many of those paintings. So we know that some of the restorations add some color to it.
And why did they use glue?
They use some kind of glue based on rabbit fat and stuff like that. It was a natural kind of glue. They did not have any chemical that we do today. It's a little bit also as a binder. Yes.
Was he commissioned for all 7 panels?
No, he wasn't. He didn't have the commission for the 7 panels. Just 2, but 1 is not going to be finished. I'm going to go to that. What I want you to see is the difference because, of course, already we see an interest in architecture. Why am I saying that? Look at the chair or the throne where she's sitting, more or less sitting, and that arch that we have in the back. And instead of using angels, he's using an architectural feature. But look at the face. Look, the face is angelic. And this is, of course, how he's going to be known for his rendition of the beautiful features. So her face is illuminated, as you can see right here. She's gazing down. There's also a position that he's going to repeat over and over. So that expression becomes a little passive and sweet because she's looking down. So she's not upright or much more, strong. But what we guess is that probably the model was one of those aristocratic or wealthy women at the time. Lucrezia Donati was the mistress of Lorenzo de' Medici. Remember, he is going to be close to Lorenzo de' Medici, and this one probably is based on her face. What we have here is a very striking red robe, which is really very, very strong, and it is associated, it has a symbolic meaning with emotion, passionate love, strength, anger, violence, and he's representing here fortitude, strength. So probably this is the way to show it. Yes, Emily?
There seems to be a distortion in the form of the body. She's not really sitting, she's super long.
Exactly. It looks like she's about to stand or sleep, yes, or stand. She's about to move from there. But also, when they planned this representations, they were up there, in an upper side of the wall. So also that perspective gives you more strength if you're looking up. So of course, it will give you this monumentality of the work. Look at the way he is presenting the folds, the textile, all of those fabrics that he's using, the armor. Remember, this is fortitude again. So it is the contrast with masculinity and femininity. The soft folds with the armor right there. The linear perspective, which Emily was saying, is also giving us that depth in this representation, but it's centered, of course. And as I mentioned, it would be high on the wall. The contrapposto, and I think in other courses I've stated that contrapposto, that means that the weight of the body is shifted to one side. Usually we tend to stand like this, or to move just a little bit the torso in comparison to the lower part. So where does this virtue come from? From the goddess that control the human destiny, Fortuna, fortitude as well. And the translation is the one who brings. Well, let me show you that those 7 heavenly virtues were brought from, first of all, the idea of the Greco-Roman tradition, but also it's going to become part of the philosophical, humanistic ideas of the Renaissance. So they become religious ideas, those virtues that come from the Greek and Roman tradition. So in the writings of an early Christian writer, who's called Pseudo Dionysius, it says that the virtues represent the outpouring of divine energy, That is where everything comes together. The Greco-Roman tradition with the Christian tradition, and they are possessed of unshakable virility. That combination of an allegorical figure as a woman, but also the strength of a man. So they are represented right here. And this one is done by Antonio and his brother Piero del Polaiolo. They're going to do the rest of them, by the way. This is Prudence, and we can compare it to the one made by Botticelli. They are similar because they're using the same composition of a kind of a throne, or this chair, magnificent chair, but there are several differences. What can you say or what can you see that is a little bit different? Anything? Any detail, maybe?
The woman is looking straight on the right, whereas the other one is looking to the left.
Yes, exactly. That is one thing. For those of you at home, if you didn't hear, the woman on the right by the Polaiolos brothers, she's looking straight, and the other one is looking she's lowering her gaze to the right. Yes.
One arm is up.
Yes, one arm is up,
And
but
the
also
other one,
the attributes. Yes, exactly.
She looks as though she's not floating.
She's not floating, exactly. The one by Polaiolo on the right, it looks really sitting down. The one by Botticelli seems like she's about to stand up or floating, as you mentioned, of course.
What's a snake about?
It's a little bit, yeah, it has that thrust, that probably or heaviness. Exactly. And also the contrast of the color, of course. Let me, there are some, let me go and see what they are writing here, not to be left alone, of course, at home. The Botticelli has greater expression. Definitely, it has much more expression. So this is Temperance, another one, also done by one of the brothers, the Polaiolo. And it is made on cypress wood. There is the perspective of the whole room, while the one by Botticelli, we see dark, the background. And it has both of them. They are monumental. So he uses another kind of wood, poplar. And it is probably, he learned from Lippi to paint in a much more intimate manner, the way that he shows the face and the tender expression that we're talking about. As we mentioned, she's ready to stand up somehow. It looks like that. And he has some details from probably decorations from the late Gothic style, where we see the representation of the decorations, of the details of the chair, as you can see right here, not only of the chair, but also on the floor. So Polaiolo, the two brothers, they are going to protest why Botticelli is involved in this commission. He should be kicked out of it. And of course, he just made one figure because of that. There were some politics in there. So he's kicked out of this commission. But both of them are based on what they knew about perspective shown in the paintings by Masaccio. So we have that they are influenced by this new knowledge of how to paint depth in a painting. So he moves on, of course, he has other commissions to paint Madonnas. We have a lot of beautiful representations where we see the light and shadow in this beautiful Madonna. We have many of them, by the way, by his workshop. And we have Savonarola's grandfather, who was in charge of the education of Savonarola, dies in 1468. So he goes to a public school, and he's going to be introduced because, of course, remember, he came from a wealthy family, so he gets an education. He's going to learn about the classics, poetry, writings of different writers like Petrarch, and he's going to earn an art degree at the University of Ferrara. Remember, he was from Ferrara. And he's going to start preparing for studying medicine, but he did not follow it up, and he abandoned those studies. But he was highly intelligent and very well educated. He writes poems. Some of those have come to this age, and how he's criticizing from the early moments that he could write something, he's criticizing the church and how corrupt the world is. So there are several titles that you're going to see there related to his writings, and he's criticizing, of course, the Pope. The Pope is very powerful. He's not going to like that, but still, he does not know anything about this young man, Savonarola. He starts to become much more religious. He hears a sermon by a preacher in Faenza, in a small town, and he persuaded him to abandon the world and to become a priest. That is where he starts getting this idea. First, he wanted to get married to his neighbor, but she did not accept. So probably that is also a circumstance that would affect his life and his decisions. And he writes a letter to his father, telling that he's troubled by his desires of the flesh, and he's already trying to limit that. And he's going to join the Dominican order. So that is how he becomes a priest. His brother was already in that same order, so he's going to be part of it. There's a story that tells a little bit about what happened to him. And he said that he was already ready to depart, and he dreamed that there was, at some moment, he was going to be cleansed from all of those dirty thoughts or whatever, because there was an icy water who came over him. So he was prepared to go to the ascetic life of a priest. That's a story. He is going to write about many of his thoughts, and some of them still today you can read them. They are being published. And on the other hand, we see Botticelli painting very successfully. He gets this commission to make Sacra Conversaciones. That means it is a representation of a conversation between saints that probably they're not at the same time in any story, but they put them in this idea of a space, a holy space, and those are represented here. This is one of them. This is an altarpiece called the Pala di San Ambrogio. And again, we see an architectural interest because it is set up inside a place, inside a room. And we have each one of them, of course, those saints that are in this sacred conversation. Francis of Assisi with John the Baptist, which of course they are from different moments in time, but it really doesn't matter. We have all of them together, just talking to each other in this holy place, and it is including these two saints, Cosmas and Damian, who are probably representing Lorenzo il Magnifico and Giuliano, his brother, that are in the foreground of this Sacra Conversazione. So even Botticelli, some scholars say that he was not educated. Probably he knew how to write and read, but probably he did not read all of the philosophy and humanist writings or anything like that. But he had friends who knew about those, and probably because of the commissions, he's going to learn about mythology and many other things. So, but he's going to have a very deep appreciation of literature and also, of course, the Bible. We have writings by Dante Alighieri. We have, of course, Livy and many other writers from antiquity, like also Ovid and the writings of the Metamorphoses, where we get a lot of mythological stories. We also know that he was knowledgeable about the writings of St. Augustine and Petrarch, of course, and Boccaccio. And Alberti, who was a writer about architecture, most likely, and also Poliziano, who is going to be a poet in the circle of Lorenzo il Magnifico. He does this painting called San Sebastian. And in this representation, this is for the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore. The representation is very simple, very elegant. This is a saint in isolation, and we have in the background this winter landscape, a very delicate representation of a landscape. But we have here a representation of an idealized place with part of the story, of course, of the saint of Saint Sebastian. If we see other examples, it was, of course, a traditional way of painting him. He's bound to a tree because he's going to be pierced by arrows, and he's not going to suffer because of his wounds. This is part of the story. Here we have another representation also showing us in the back the landscape, but we see it's a little bit different. because in this case, it's a Venetian canal. So each one of those artists are going to represent him in other places, even though, of course, we know that the story does not relate to the landscape. But this one is by Piero del Polaiolo. Remember the same one of the brothers who was painting the Virtues. And this one was commissioned by the Pucci family, another very wealthy family in Florence. In this case, we see a representation of a circle of figures in the foreground and the saint in the center, what we see right here. And there are other things that we can see through this painting by Polaiolo, because the saint right here is being wounded and he's suffering from it. There is a perfect equilibrium because of the circle, but if we compare it with the painting by Botticelli, there is a difference. What do you think is the difference here? Anything? More tension on the left hand. Yes, more tension.
Face is totally different.
The base, of course, both of them, he's on a tree, right?
Yes.
But look at the angle, look at the landscape. The landscape in Polaiolo is almost as important as the figure in the center, and also the other people that are surrounding it. Yes?
There's anguish in the face.
Exactly. There's anguish here, he's suffering, and Botticelli, he's going to paint him as an elegant person, very calm.
It's angelic.
Exactly. He's above pain, above suffering, because that is how the story goes, that he did not feel any pain because of that. And actually, the arrows did not kill him. He's going to be killed later on. But here we have a sweet, angelical figure, very elegant. And look at the anatomy of the body, also very, very muscular, but also very elegant, like very, very sophisticated. Now he's gonna get a commission. Yes, I'm sorry. You want?
No, but it was actually what the body looked like. I mean, he as if he studied it.
Oh, well, I'm not so sure, because it is a little bit longer than we would like to think. So it is idealized a little bit, it's kind of a little bit.
You think?
I think so. I think that is a little bit longer than it would be.
Usually men's bodies do not go whoop like this in.
No, I understand.
A lot of times, if he was having to stand like that, wouldn't his ribs show? The rib cage?
Probably both of them show a little bit of the rib cage. Yes, you were gonna say something?
There's an irony, because on the left, the arrows don't look like they're piercing very
That's
deeply.
true.
And on the right, where he's not in pain, they're much deeper.
That's very true. That's a very good observation. Yes, very good observation. I like that. Well, he received a commission to go to Pisa to do frescoes for the Camposanto. Very often people go to Pisa, they just see the tower, that's it. The Camposanto is a beautiful place if you ever go back to Pisa, if you have ever been, or if you go for the first time. So his reputation starts to grow. He becomes more and more successful. He becomes more and more known. And these are some of the frescoes that have survived, not by Botticelli, because none of them survived. So most of the frescoes that we have are done by Gozzoli, which actually for 20 years is going to work on those frescoes. They suffered through the war, World War II, almost destroyed the whole thing. But today they have been restored, but not by Botticelli. There's not any work by Botticelli that has survived today.
Is that building right where the P Tower is, or is it somewhere else?
It's around it's
Right, in
on
that
the
same-
side, exactly, in the same area where you see, like, there's the tower, and then there's the church, and then there's the Camposanto. Now, Camposanto actually is a cemetery, but it is a square place, and it is a beautiful building. I'm sorry?
What was the purpose of the Camposanto?
It's a cemetery. You can see here some of the sarcophagus.
Okay.
Some of them are very old, that are still there. Let's see one of the paintings from this period, which is the Adoration of the Magi. He made around 8 versions later on. This is the first one, and I probably is the masterpiece of those representations. This is going to be commissioned by a moneylender who was very wealthy, that was connected to the Medici family. His name is Sanobi, and he wanted to have this as a decoration for his chapel, his funerary chapel. Everybody would do something like that in Santa Maria Novella. So he commissions this painting from Botticelli. What we see right here, first of all, is the story, of course, of the adoration of the Magi who come to visit the newborn Jesus Christ. And we have a variety of expressions, not only in the face, but also in the different postures of the bodies of all of the figures right here. But he's going to depict the most important people in the circle, of course, of the Medici. So Cosimo de' Medici, who's the founder or the most important men of the Medici lineage. Then we see his sons, Piero and Giovanni. And then we have the grandsons of Cosimo, which is Giuliano. And on the other side, we're going to see Lorenzo. But Giuliano actually is going to die very young because he's going to be stabbed in the church. Also, besides Giuliano, we see some of the poets and philosophers that were part of the circle of the Medici. Angelo Poliziano, who is a poet, as I mentioned. Piccolo di la Mirandola, also a philosopher and writer. Here we have some of the drawings that we see the development of the drawing and the disegno. Let me show you the other side where we find Lorenzo de' Medici, who's going to be Lorenzo il Magnifico. He's the grandson of Cosimo, and he's going to become later. And the other man that we see here is the donor. Gaspare de Lama is the only figure who's looking out of the picture, along with the self-portrait of Botticelli. So both of them. So what do you think this means, that he's including himself in this painting? Any clues?
Giving himself importance?
Yes, but he's very secure of himself. He's very sure of himself. He says, you know what? I'm part of this circle. I belong here. So he was part of it, of course, and he's looking out. We see also that the way that he's making the composition, it has a triangular balance, a structure of triangles, like we see right here. Later, we're going to see also the same composition by Leonardo da Vinci, where you find the triangular shape composition. Even though it's an unfinished painting, we have the same idea of geometry in the structure of a composition. Savonarola, by this time, 1475, he goes to Bologna. He enters the convent of San Domenico, and he goes to these friars who are preachers. He's going to learn how to preach, and he asks to be admitted. We know that because of a letter that he sends to his father. So Savonarola is going to be in San Domenico. And by the way, just as a side note, this is this altarpiece, which is the design. Actually, it's not an altarpiece; it's a design for a tomb, and this was done in the 13th century by Nicola Pisano, one of the earliest, artists of the early or precursors of the Renaissance. Actually, later on, they're going to have additions. And just as a side note, here we have some of the earliest representations by Michelangelo. Here we have San Procolo, which is right here on the corner. There are add-ons to this tomb. And on the other side, we see this angel also by Michelangelo, which is holding a candle, also by Michelangelo. And this one also by Michelangelo is another of those saints, Saint Petronio. But just as a side note, this is the same place where he's going to learn to preach. He joins, of course, the order. He is vowing poverty, chastity, and obedience. And he's going to enroll as part of the theological faculty. So as I mentioned, he's very intelligent and he's very knowledgeable, and he is writing and reading, and he's studying the scriptures, of course, logic, the Aristotelian philosophy. At this time, it was also something that was taught, and what is called the Thomistic theology, which comes from St. Thomas. So he's practicing how to preach, and he starts to be very critical of the rules of the convent and the decline of austerity in the convent, because of course some of those priests would have luxuries, and it is against the rules of that order. Now we have a representation also done by Botticelli, or probably also his assistants. And this has been identified probably as the grandmother of the sculptor Bandinelli, because there is an inscription that was added later with the name of her, but probably is not real. We don't know exactly if this is her or not, Smeralda Mandinelli, but this is an inscription that was added because we know that the sculptor did not use that name until later. So that is also something incorrect, that is not probably correct. But what we see right here is one of the first examples of how to portray somebody in the three-quarter pose that we're gonna see later with the Mona Lisa. In this case, she is inside in this window, which is actually representing a terrace. She has her head holding the frame of it, but also we have here the comparison, and this is the copy of the Mona Lisa. This is the actual contemporary copy of the Mona Lisa, but I'm showing it here, but she has the same kind of dress, which is called the guarnello, also called also the cotta, which is another part, which is a light summer gown, and very often also associated with people or women who were pregnant or just gave birth. So again, we see that information through, of course, studying some other representation. This is the original Mona Lisa, but we have the same posture, three-quarters. Again, we see that not very often during this period. Savonarola is going to interrupt his studies in 1478, and he's going to be sent to the Dominican Priory of Santa Maria de Angeli in Ferrara. So he goes back to his hometown. This is, of course, again, he's criticizing the order, and everybody starts to hate him because he's criticizing the way that they behave. This man, Vincenzo Mandello, who was the leader of the prior, actually, later on, is going to become the prior of Santa Maria della Grazie, where Leonardo da Vinci is going to make his famous Last Supper. He is going to be later very involved with this painting, this fresco, and he's going to tell Leonardo da Vinci, and he's going to suggest some of the representations right here of the Last Supper. And probably he's the figure of Judas Iscariot, because what they say is that he had a terrible personality, and Leonardo da Vinci hated him. So that's why it probably is the model for the traitor. But nevertheless, we see Botticelli, who is going to paint some frescoes for the Custom House of Florence. Those frescoes are no longer, they have been lost, but the topic is the execution of the hanging of the Pazzi conspiracy. This was a very important moment in Florence because they're going to try to kill Lorenzo de' Medici, the Pazzi, and later on they're going to be hanged. This is the moment later when the Medici family is going to be expelled from Florence, and then when they return, they're going to destroy the Pazzi family, and those frescoes are going to also be destroyed when they are going to be exiled. But here we have a bronze medal with the portrait of Lorenzo on top of it, and it is the representation of the attempt to assassinate him in the Duomo. They actually killed his brother. So this is when they kill him. And here we have the drawing that was made by Da Vinci from that moment when they hanged the Pazzi enemies and the conspiracy of the Pazzi. So that fresco supposedly was in the Palazzo Vecchio, and when Vasari, again, this biographer, is going to remodel the building, that fresco got lost, so we don't longer have it. We do have other paintings that are done in the technique of a fresco. So the Vespucci family commissioned this painting of St. Augustine. And why do we know? Not only because of documents, but here we have the coat of arms of the Vespucci family for the Ognissanti. Remember, this is the Ognissanti Church, which is All Saints Church in the Ognissanti neighborhood, where he was born and he's going to live the rest of his life. And this is his earliest fresco to survive. We don't have the other ones. We have this one. St. Augustine here is in front of an open book. He's sitting down. He's looking up. He is meditating. He has this vision as he began to write a letter to St. Jerome. And this is supposedly he is in his studio as he's writing. Here we have the coat of arms of the Vespucci family, which are wasps. So we can recognize it also there. Here we have the detail of it and also some of the other things that we have here. Because we see this clock, which tells you part of the story, which is the hour of compline. And that means that it's the end of the 24 hours, when supposedly St. Augustine is going to say that Jerome died at that time. So it has a very symbolic meaning to that clock. Not only that, but we have books of geometry. We also have this spherical astrolabe. Here is an original one. So, of course, St. Augustine is a man of knowledge. He is probably also a man who knows science. The line that we read somewhere in some of those books says something very kind of, I would say, not very known what it means, but it says, where is Brother Martino? He went out. And where did he go? He's outside Portal Prato. Supposedly is something, a kind of a dialogue that probably Botticelli overheard from the priests of the church. But really, we do not know. What we see are all of the details, like the bishop has, which is called a meter, which we see right there, also related to St. Augustine. And we see another painting which was commissioned, but in this case to another artist, Domenico Ghirlandaio, also for the Church of the Ognissanti. And here we have St. Jerome in his study. So there is a dialogue between, of course, St. Augustine and St. Jerome. And this is the idea that we have two different artists and two different saints in a dialogue. And this is a photograph where it was originally. Today is no longer there, it's at the Uffizi. So we have a little bit of comparison with the other one by Botticelli, a little bit more conventional figure, and following the northern models like this one, which was actually, this is not exactly the one that I'm talking about, but something very similar was part of the collection of Lorenzo de' Medici, where we see the representation by Jan van Eyck, and we have the same representation of Saint Jerome, who is reading, and in his study we do not have the lion on the other one, but we do see lots of objects and even Hebrew and Greek letters, because he was a translator of the Bible. Not only that, we have here the names, the letters, I'm sorry, and for example, glasses, scissors, inkwells, a candle because he's working probably at night. Then we see here on the upper part, the hat of a cardinal, by the way, the one by Jan van Eyck, he has it on, and two pharmacist vases, and then on this side, we have a rosary, some kind of fruit, two glass bottles, and an hourglass, also related to time. So we have the two of them, one in front of the other, by two different artists, Ghirlandaio and Botticelli. We have two saints who are connected, and at the same time, both of them are in their own studies, and both of them are with lots of different objects, still life paintings all around, different things that relate to their lives or also to their knowledge and to their studies. And probably the one by Botticelli is much more expressive in the composition. Also look at the way of the perspective of Botticelli. It's a little more angular and a little bit more pronounced. Look at the upper part where the objects are in that area. You can see like the top of the ceiling almost of this representation. And he's looking up, of course, in meditation. The other one is looking out onto us. The tondo, which is a circular representation, is going to become his signature. He is going to produce many of those Madonnas. There is one that was the first one, supposedly, that today has been lost. It was for a banker, and Francesco Gonzaga, one of those very wealthy bankers in Rome. And that's how he becomes famous outside of Florence, because he gets this commission. But this one, it is a very similar one, which is called the Madonna with Lilies and 8 Angels. And each one of those angels are represented here like boys, contemporary boys, no wings, no halos. They are all of them very beautiful, and they are dressed as with contemporary garb. So they are representing people from that moment. We get to this painting. Another of those paintings are very important, which is the Primavera, the spring. And this was commissioned by Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici, who is a cousin of Lorenzo il Magnifico. The name is very similar. I know that you can get confused, but Pierfrancesco is a cousin of Lorenzo il Magnifico, and he wanted some paintings for his villa in Castello, which is a small town outside of Florence. Here we have the main figure, which is, of course, the representation of Venus. And then we see this image in the center, the representation of an ideal beauty. And look how he uses geometry. Let me go back so you can understand what I'm talking about. Even though we see that it is a garden, we don't have an actual view of a landscape. But what he actually puts here is this kind of halo, which is not actually a halo. It's just an open area of the whole lush garden with lots of plants and trees. And we see on top of it, Cupid, which is blinded. Remember, love has to be blind. Here we have him, on the top. He's wearing a dress that is related to a wedding, a matrimonial dress, probably because it was commissioned when Pierfrancesco was going to be married. So probably this is this allusion to that. Also, the gesture looks like she's blessing the rest of the figures. Again, we see the combination of the humanist philosophy, where we have a combination of Greek philosophy with Christianity. So we have mythological figures, and we see here some of the important figures of this representation. And this one, of course, is Mercury. He is also known as Hermes. It depends on you're talking Latin or Greek, but he is a messenger. And this is the month of May, which is spring, and the Garden of Venus. That's why we see Venus in the center. Then Mercury is the messenger. And why do we know he's a messenger? Of course, from mythology, Greek mythology, but look at, first of all, his sandals. His sandals have, and I know it's very hard to see, but they have wings, okay? So he flies with his sandals. Botticelli, like other artists, would have kind of this herbal catalog. And he would, of course, represent each one of the different flowers and plants. And they had identified, botanists had identified in this painting alone around 138 different species of flowers and plants in this representation. So it's really very detailed what we can see on the ground and all around this wonderful garden. What Mercury is doing right here is poking the clouds so you could have the summer. So chasing away the clouds, and he's poking the clouds so they can go away. This really, of course, part of the story. What Botticelli chose to do is representing this figure in an androgynous way. That means a combination of youth, which is boy, girl, which is still not developed as an adult, also very, very handsome. And probably the model is Pierfrancesco himself, Pierfrancesco de' Medici. Let me show you here who was represented. Probably this is also a portrait of him. Again, we don't know exactly if this is the portrait of Pierfrancesco, but he has in his hands the medal of Cosimo the Elder, who is, of course, the founder of the whole family, and also a painting by Botticelli. And look at this one, which is really funny. This is Mercury. Instead of poking the clouds, he's painting the ceiling of a room. Well, this is just so you could laugh a little bit. So Cupid is on top of the whole scene, and he's aiming his arrow to the three charities that you see dancing there. The charities, of course, are also called the three graces that are dancing right there. And probably one of them is Caterina Sforza, one of the, of course, richest daughters of the wealthy families. But Sforza is more related to the family in Milan, or Simonetta Vespucci, which we see right here. If we see the representation, it's an idealized beauty. She was a wife of Marco Vespucci, but supposedly she was the mistress of Giuliano de' Medici, the one that was stabbed, and the brother of Lorenzo. I know it's kind of confusing, but everything comes together. She's going to be portrayed by many artists, not only by Botticelli. Here we have represented by Piero di Cosimo as Cleopatra. Many scholars say that she is the same woman, and we see her probably right here. All of them are probably based on the inspiration by the most beautiful woman in Florence at the time, Simonetta Vespucci. And we see this one, as I mentioned before, she died when she was 22 years old, 1476, of tuberculosis, it came from her lung infection. So Botticelli became obsessed with her beauty. And for many years after she died, he's going to be inspired by her. And we're going to see over and over drawings that are, of course, he's idealizing her beauty, the beauty of the time. And this is one drawing made by him, the study of Simonetta Vespucci, or just the study of a lady. So we have this painting with those two figures on the side. They are representing these two images. Of course, Zephyr, which is the wind that is trying to get, of course, the nymph Chloris as his wife. So he's going to take her away, and he's going to transform her into Flora, which is right here, the other figure. So this is a very specific moment in the story. And she's scattering flowers because she's bringing, of course, spring. The clothes of those two figures are blown in different ways because Zephyr is the god of wind. So she's blowing wind all over the place. And all of this is described in the writings by Ovid. The stories, the legends, the myth. So they are, of course, read by the humanists. But some scholars have interpreted this painting as a political representation. And probably because Cupid, which is love, amor, it is probably the palindrome of Roma. It has the same letters. Venus, right here, is Venice. This is an interpretation. The three graces represent the three different cities of Pisa, Naples, and Genoa. Mercury represents Milan. And Flora is representing Florence, the city of flowers. And Chloris and Zephyr are other two cities, Arezzo and Forli. So probably, I'm not so sure about that interpretation. Nevertheless, it's a wonderful, wonderful painting. Look at the expression of Zephyr. He has, of course, the wind in his inside his mouth, and he's about to blow. And she is, Chloris right here, from her mouth, flowers are coming out as she's being taken away by the god of wind. Yes, let me go back.
Excuse me, what's this, excuse me, wasn't this painting, for the backboard of Lorenzo Medici's bed?
For the Pierfrancesco.
Yes.
Pierfrancesco commissioned this one probably when he got married, but not Lorenzo. This is the cousin of Lorenzo, Pierfrancesco.
For the backboard bed, wasn't it?
Not for the backboard, but to decorate his villa. Probably for his bedroom, yes.
Yes, Spinelli, yes, Spinelli.
Villa Castelli, the one that I know of, but probably another. Spaliera, you mean?
Yes.
The Spaliera, I'm gonna show you one that it is a Spaleria. No, it's not because of the dimensions of it, but it was decorating probably his room, his bedroom. He's going to, of course, be emulated by many other artists. Here we have this representation of the fairies dancing, probably drawn from that. The dance by Matisse, probably also an inspiration from these three graces dancing, but many others, of course, like this one, which is Robert Delaunay, one of the Cubist artists after Braque and Picasso. We see here again the three graces represented right here in the Cubist style, or also Mayol, who was an artist, a sculptor, also inspired by these three graces dancing in a rondel. And Magritte, which the surrealist artist, also inspired by the Primavera, and many others. Of course, I'm just mentioning some of them. Now, what happened to Botticelli? In 1481, the Pope, which is Sixtus IV, he wants artists coming to Florence to decorate the Sistine Chapel. And this is, of course, a moment which is going to become very important for Botticelli, because he goes along with others, because Lorenzo de' Medici is the most powerful man, and he's going to send artists from Florence. Lorenzo de' Medici gets this peace deal with the Pope, because the Pope was also involved in that conspiracy with the Pazzi family. So to get kind of this agreement of peace, he's going to send out his artists from Florence, and they're going to decorate the Sistine Chapel. This is the way that the Sistine Chapel is going to look like before Michelangelo. So we have artists like Ghirlandaio going to Florence, Cosimo Rosselli, and also Perugino. So they're going to decorate, and you can see right here, 14 scenes around the walls of the Sistine Chapel. And they are representing the life of Jesus Christ and the life of Moses. And probably you know why these two lives are important. Anybody? Any clues why life of Jesus Christ and life of Moses? Well, it's really very interesting, because what he wants to state, the Pope wants to state to everybody, that there's a continuation between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So Moses, of course, he's getting the message of Jesus Christ, of course, and I'm sorry. So Jesus Christ is the one who chose St. Peter to be his descendant as the representation of Jesus Christ on earth, and it's going to be the first bishop of Rome. So the Pope becomes this part of this lineage of bishops. So we have a very important message through the church. And Moses is going to state the law. Because of that, we have, of course, the representation of both moments, the Old Testament and the New Testament. And this on the upper, this is the part where they're going to paint. And the upper part is going to be representing different popes, of course, idealized popes from antiquity. We don't have photographs at the time, so we don't know exactly how they look like. But this is how it looked before the ceiling was painted. The lower part has, and still has, some drapery, which is a trompe-l'oeil. It looks like it's a drapery, but it's a painting, I'm sorry. And then we see the biblical scenes from Moses and Jesus, portraits of the popes, and that was it. Afterwards, it's going to become, of course, the Sistine Chapel that you know today, with the ceiling painted by Michelangelo. But three paintings are going to be done by Botticelli. And one is the Temptation of Jesus Christ, the Youth of Moses, which is right here. And on the other side, we see the Punishment of the Sons of Korah. So we have three different paintings done by Botticelli, alongside, of course, by Perugino and other artists. So he's going to, not only him, but other artists are going to design and prepare the cartoons. The idea is that you prepare the design, then you make it larger, and then you can put on top of the wall, and with a technique that you can just put the lining of the cartoon on the wall, and then you do the fresco. It's a whole process. But when they enlarge it, it is a preparation for it. The popes were done by different artists, but at least 7 were done by Botticelli, and we have, of course, idealized version of those popes that came before. Some of them have been damaged and then restored, and they also include what we call trompe-l'oeil, which is the trick to the eye. It looks like there is a niche. It looks like there are decorations on the wall. It looks like there are columns. All of it is painted. So it adds depth. Of course, later on, Michelangelo is going to do it on the ceiling, doing exactly the same trompe-l'oeil. Let's analyze this painting, which represents, of course, the life of Moses in his youth. And there are many things happening at the same time. There's a whole narrative, the whole story. Remember, the Sistine Chapel was not open to the public. It was only for the priests and the Pope himself. But you would have to know the story behind it if you want to understand the painting. And you start at one point of the story, and here we have Moses killing an Egyptian, where he was living, of course, in Egypt at the time. Then we see him fleeing away, and he goes with the Midianites. And here we have him again. How do we know it's Moses? Because he's wearing the same kind of clothes. He never changed. So we see him with that yellow dress and green fabric on top of it. And he is dispersing the shepherds right here. And he goes into the well and he meets Jethro's daughters right here. One is going to become his wife, by the way, Zipporah. Then we go up and we have the burning bush where God appears, and he's taking off his shoes to go to this holy area where God is appearing. And then he's leading his people out of Egypt. So look at how complex this composition is. We have so many things going on, and the way that you would read it is kind of this zigzag that you would just go around on top of the hill and then come back. So of course your eye would have to know the story before reading it or trying to understand it. And the way that it works, so we have the cartoons, then you would pounce it, you would make holes in the cartoon, the enlargement of the drawing, then you would make the holes, and then you would place it on top of the wall. You would pounce it with some kind of charcoal, and then you would have the dots of the line that you would be working on. I don't know if I made that myself clear, but you would have to work very, very fast in what is called the giornata. Giornata means a day's work. So you prepare just a space where you know that you're going to work on that day, and you put stucco, or you put gesso, or you put plaster on it. So while it's fresh, it's wet, you work very fast. When it dries, the wall absorbs the painting. So that's how they have to work. So you have to know exactly, more or less, how long are you going to paint on that area. So the giornata usually, and I don't know if that's as clear like right here, but if you know that you're going to paint the face, you only prepare that area. And often we see some of the lines where they would end the giornata. Not always is very clear, but you can see here that some parts are darker than others. Of course, it has been cracked through time. Of course, it's part of the wall. But you would end at some point where you know there's a limit or the outline of something. So you wouldn't show all of the places that you were working on later. Here we have an image of the detail of one of the daughters of Jethro, Zipporah, who would become Moses' wife. Look how complicated this project was, because we have 4 artists working in a wall surrounding the whole Sistine Chapel. And Pietro Perugino, who was the first artist who was working in the Sistine Chapel, he's the first one who arrived there, he's going to set up the rules or the requirements. So what we have right here is that everything has to be unified. Everything has to be coherent. So there's a scale that has to be consistent all through the walls, first of all. The crowds and the figures have to be in the foreground. So we have much more natural way of representing a space. The landscape is on the upper part or the back of it. The horizon has to match all over the place. So even though someone is working on one side, which is actually Botticelli on one side, Perugino on the other, it would have to look that all of them were working together. Now we have also these pilasters, which are templeuils, which are painted, which are going to divide each one of the scenes. And Moses always has to have the same color of clothes, yellow and green. So we recognize him all over the place, the same as Jesus Christ would be. This is a detail when they were restoring it. So you have the scale of each one of those frescoes, those murals. the one that I'm showing you here with the detail of that trompe-l'œil, of the pilaster, which are, as I mentioned, painted. And you can see part of the curtains that I was talking about. They are not actually curtains, they are paintings of curtains. So we have another image by Botticelli. It's called The Punishment of Cora, and it looks like a triptych. Even though it's not a triptych, it's not divided, but we have a narrative also divided in 3 different scenes. And we see that it is represented here, Aaron. This is a moment when he is organizing some kind of giving back in a sacrifice, because people wanted to go back to Egypt. Remember, they go out of Egypt and they have been slaves for so many years, and they are starving, even though this does not look like they are starving, but they are starving, and they are walking and walking, and they do not get anywhere. So they want to go back to Egypt, and there's a revolt. So Aaron is going to organize into making sacrifices to God. And Moses, actually, who is his brother, there's kind of this competition between these 2 powerful men. And he says, we shouldn't do any animal sacrifices. We're we're not in Holy Land, and we only need to make incense rituals, not of sacrifices. Well, then you remember the golden calf, probably, etc. So we have here different scenes. Of course, Moses, which we identify. We see this image on the right-hand side where Joshua is protecting Moses. Here we have Moses with the rays coming out of his forehead, and Joshua who's protecting him. He's going to be an army man. In the story, of course, of Joshua comes afterwards in the Bible. And on that side, we see the punishment. Again, we see Moses right there. And this is the punishment of the rebels that are being swallowed by the earth. And here we see the opening right there of the earth and people who have been swallowed. And the 2 innocent sons of Korah who are floating on that cloud. I don't know if you can see the cloud over there. So they are exempt, of course. The representation of this arch, actually, it is inspired by the Arch of Constantine. The Emperor Constantine is the first Christian emperor, and this is in Rome. So he's the one who gave the Pope the temporal power. And what they're stating here is exactly that line from the Old Testament to the New Testament, and the Pope is the successor. So he is the justification of his power on earth. Here we have an inscription that says, "Let no man take the honor to himself, except that he is called by God, as Aaron was." And there is a political reference, of course, not to the fact of the Pope, because he is wearing the tiara of a bishop, which we see right here. So again, there is always a political statement. And we go to the next mural made by him, by Botticelli, The Temptations of Christ. And we have here again the horizon, which is constant with the rest of the paintings around the Sistine Chapel. So Jesus here is fasting, and he's tempted by the devil, and he's dressed as a hermit. He's, of course, tempting him. And he turns stones into bread. This is a miracle. On top of the church, who actually is representing the chapel of Santa Maria in Traspontina in Rome, the devil has carried Jesus on the top of this temple of Jerusalem. So this is, of course, an allegorical representation. And he throws himself down, but God protects him. And then on the third scene right here, the devil takes him up to a mountain, and he's promising, of course, the power on his domain, etc. But angels are coming here to aid him, and they help him out. On the foreground, we see the image of a leper who's dressed in white, who's bringing offerings to the high priest with a bowl of water and an hyssop. Actually, this is symbolizing Moses as the law. And it is, of course, used to cleanse yourself at the temple, to purify yourself. The 2 offerings that we have here that are traditionally painted are the 2 fowls, which we see right here, and wood, cedar wood for the temple, offerings for the temple in Jerusalem. It's a very, very interesting representation where all of the people, the crowds, are in the foreground, as I mentioned, and on the back we see the landscape. Botticelli, because he had a workshop with many assistants, he was successful at this time. He's going to reuse some of the sketches that he had done in other paintings. Like here we have this image on the fresco in the Sistine Chapel, and then probably he had taken the same from the Primavera, and he will reuse it later on in this painting, the Venus, the Birth of Venus, which we're going to see. Just to mention one of the 8 versions of the Adoration of the Magi, and it was done when he was in Rome. Everything has a center perspective, and we have the comparison with the other one that he'd made before. But we see more or less the same composition, although in this case, it has more interest in representing perspective with a central focal point in 1482 while he was still in Rome. He comes back to Florence when his father died, and he will stay in Florence for the rest of his life. Savonarola also is going to be in Florence at the time, 1482, and he's going to be a teacher at the convent of San Marco in Florence. This photograph shows you probably where he lived in the convent, but I wanted to show you this chair because today is known as the Savonarola chair. Doesn't mean that he used it, but it was very common at that time. But the name was given in the 19th century, and it is a folding chair. But if you ever search Savonarola, it will probably show you this chair, the Savonarola chair. He is going to teach while he is in Florence of philosophy, theology, and many other things. Many of the paintings, by the way, are from the 19th century and the 20th century showing Savonarola. They are not contemporary paintings from that period. But he was made fun of because he had this very thick Ferrara accent, and people did not like it, that he was preaching in Florence. And also the voice was very strident, and he was preaching purity. Remember, people are wealthy in Florence, they are a thriving city, they are merchants, they are used to luxury, etc., and did not like him at all at the beginning. That is going to change. So he's going to be transferred to another church, less important, and he's studying the scriptures, he's studying a little more. Botticelli gets a commission with other artists to make frescoes in Volterra, very near Volterra, in a small palace. And I wanted to get to this painting because it's another of those masterpieces that a lot of people know. The Birth of Venus. But actually, it's not the birth of Venus. She's not being born here. What is happening in this representation? Anybody, what do you see here? Yes, go ahead.
Blowing her ashore.
Exactly, they're blowing her ashore and she's coming to the island of Cythera. So it's not really how she was born, but it is afterwards, but it is named, of course, the Birth of Venus. And it was made on canvas, not on wood. Remember, I told you that was not very common to use canvas at this point, but canvas has a very important quality. You can just roll it, and it's lighter, and you can just take it everywhere you want. So probably because they wanted to be transported into the villa of the Medici. So it comes from the myth of written by Homer and also by Hesiod and other writers that tell us about how she was born. First of all, her father, Kronos, which is the god of time. Kronos, so if you think about chronological, comes from the god Kronos. He got off his father's genitals. His father was, and I know I have an accent, Uranus, so don't make fun of me, but it has to do with the whole story. When he cuts off his genitals, they are thrown into the ocean. And that is how Venus is going to be born, from the foam of the genitals that were thrown into the ocean. So that is, of course, that story. So this is not representing that moment. It's representing afterwards. Actually, she was born as an adult, not as a baby. But this is how she is born. Very beautiful, of course. And she's going to come ashore because, of course, she's going to be blown by, again, we see the same figures. And, of course, we see Zephyr. The other one is Aura, and they bring spring. So what is happening here is that they are blowing away or blowing into to the shore this Venus, which is bringing spring with her. And on the other side, we see here that she is being welcomed and she's going to be covered with this mantle because she is born as an adult. She is in the nude, and she's going to be covered right here. And she gets to the island of Cythera, as I mentioned. This is, of course, we know from all of those writings of the story. Pliny, he writes about a painting by Apelles. This is a famous story, of course, and Poliziano, who was part of the circle of Lorenzo il Magnifico, this poet, he's going to write a poem inspired by this. And if you look at the painting, it is exactly the description of this poem. So Poliziano probably was really involved in this representation, and I'm going to read it. Of Aldo's gold, brothers, beautiful Aphrodite, I shall sing to those domain belong to the battlements of all sea love. Cyprus, where blown by the moist breath of Zephyros, she was carried over the waves of the resounding sea on soft foam. The gold filleted Horae happily welcomed her and clothed her with heavenly raiment. Of course, Aphrodite is Venus, and Cyprus also is Cythera, and of course, Zephyros is Zephyr, and Horae probably is the one who's putting the cloak on top of it. Even though he never saw this fresco, this is a fresco in Pompeii, but it shows you how she is presented here in that shell, and she is being brought into the island of Cythera. The details are also very symbolic. The laurel probably represents Lorenzo il Magnifico, Lorenzo de' Medici. The flowers represents probably Florence, the city of flowers, and many other things around it. The painting, and it is not a bad criticism, it's very flat. He's not painting architectural details anymore. In this case, we see a beautiful landscape, but it's also very decorative in that respect. So there's very little depth. We see also there's a lot of movement or an intention of movement, and it's really what I call visual poetry. So if we think about this painting as something that is happening, we are going to read it from left to right. So we see they are blowing, of course, wind behind her. They are pushing her into the shore. Here we have her getting into the shore with the shell as this kind of a boat, and she's arriving. And then Horae is welcoming her. So it's kind of this transition, what is happening, and then you see the movement and you understand what I'm talking about. So, of course, it looks a little bit stiff because we are used to different representations of movement. But this was probably the one that was not the Primavera, hang over the marital. There's not a board for the table. It's not a headboard, but because we use it in a different way, we would put our pillows on top of it. It would be part showed, but that's the spalliera, but it's not exactly because this is larger than that. This is very, very large. And hopefully, if I have time, I'm going to show you a spalliera. But it becomes very controversial afterwards because they thought it was very erotic. So for many years, for actually many, many years, it was hidden away. And it is, as I quoting our critic, it's a daily celebration of human desire. But it was also an inspiration for a marital celebration. If you compare this by Masaccio, this is a fresco by Masaccio, the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. Look, the expression of the faces, and look how different Botticelli is painting, because he is always representing beauty in an idealized way, but we're going to see very often. The representation, of course, of that design or that drawing, remember I told you about the line, the importance of the line. It is also representing movement. Look at the flowers floating around. He is moving, of course, Zephyr is blowing a wind, and she represents breeze. So she's just, almost very subtle, opening her mouth, her lips. And also wind is coming out of her mouth. So it's wind and breeze. And on the other side, we see Flora or Hora, one of the goddess of the seasons. She's throwing that cloak to cover the nakedness of Venus. And I mentioned that outline, the contour with a black line. She looked like a sculpture, very stiff at the same time. And this painting was done 10 years after Simonetta had died. She died when she was 22 years old. And Botticelli is bringing her back because he idealizes her beauty. Of course, he is inspired by the Venus Pudica, there are several representations. This is the Capitoline Venus, but many of those sculptures from the Greco-Roman civilization, both of them, are copies from, the Romans are copying the Greek, and most likely they are copying the ones from Praxiteles, which is no longer, of course, it has been lost, the original, but they are covering their private parts. So that's why it's called Venus Pudica. So here we have an interpretation of that same posture that comes from antiquity. And there are several copies probably made by his workshop. One is in Turin, this one is in Berlin, and we see that it is the same representation. The difference is that here we don't have any other things that we see in the original one of the birth of Venus. We don't have any background, and it's only the single figure, the center of this composition. As I mentioned, he's going to use the same prototypes in many occasions. Here we have it from the Sistine Chapel, which I mentioned, the representation of the Primavera, the three graces, and here we have the representation of Flora, or the goddess of the seasons, Horae. So we have a big workshop. Here we have Simonetta Vespucci, probably the same that we see in the Venus that we have here. They're very similar, and the features, of course, are interpreted as that. Simonetta is going to be buried in the same church, in the Chiesa Ordini Santi. And when Botticelli died, actually 34 years later, he's going to want to be buried beside her, and that is where you find his tomb. People today go to the church and they leave messages for Botticelli and for Simonetta. It's really, there's a box with letters for him in all different languages from all over the world, even in Chinese and many others. Now, Venus, of course, Venus is represented by Andy Warhol and by many other artists, as you see even Lady Gaga wearing this Dolce & Gabbana dress with the representation of the birth of Venus, and many others, which I'm mentioning just a few of them, like the photographer David LaChapelle, who is inspired by the Venus, of course, the birth of Venus, and many others, as I mentioned. So these two paintings are probably the most famous ones made by Botticelli. And this one, was seen by Giorgio Vasari still when he visited the Villa Castello. And they were both owned by Pierfrancesco de' Medici, the Primavera and the birth of Venus, of course. In 1987, they restored both of them. They removed the old varnish, and today you can see the restoration with lots of beautiful colors and a new varnish, of course. And this is a spaliera, because you were asking, and I'm gonna rush to do this. So what we see right here, first of all, is Venus and Mars. And it is this representation that it is very long and in a rectangular shape, where he uses his style, linear contours, the outline that we have seen. Venus is the goddess of love, Aphrodite, of course, in Greek. And look at the semicircle, which is the composition of this representation. It is made with tempera, again, not using oil whatsoever. And this is the illicit relationship between Mars and Venus, because she was married to Vulcan, but they are in this countryside. And then we see the image of these three little satyrs that have his lance. This belongs to Mars. He is a god of war, and they're playing with it. Of course, one puts the helmet on, and he's asleep. What do you think that just happened between these two people? They just had sex, and he's already so tired. but she is in control. And it has been interpreted in very different ways. First of all, the satyrs are playing, and they are even blowing the shell, sorry, on the right-hand side, he is blowing this shell on, and he is not, he's so tired that he does not get up. And there's some kind of humor and humanity, but also Venus is in control. She's very elegant. She's dressed, by the way. Mars is relaxed. He's asleep. He's naked. And this representation is the power of love over war to different gods, but also women over men that can be very, very powerful and manipulative. And there's a description of the painting that comes from a poem from antiquity as well. And here we have also a detail of the wasps that probably was a commission by the Vespucci family. Remember these, the coat of arms. And this is a spalliera, and I'm going to show you why. And probably is part of the casone, which was also a gift for the newlyweds, where you would put all of your things, your clothes, exactly. But also because of the shape of it, they think it's a spalliera, because the idea is that it is from your back. Espaldar is in Latin or in Spanish as well. And it was decorating probably the marriage room. So this is an actual spalliera that we know that it was a spalliera because of the dimensions of it. But the other one was, of course, and here we have the idea of course, of love and marriage, etc. And so this one actually was bought in the auction house Christie's, and the National Gallery bought it from them in the 19th century. And it is the only mythological subject matter that has been sold in the open market, which is really by Botticelli, of course. So let's just talk a little bit about what happened to Savonarola before we leave. So Savonarola gets really powerful in Florence. He's preaching against the Medici. He's preaching against the Pope. The Pope, of course, gets very angry, and he bans him from preaching. He disobeys. He still is preaching in Florence. And he's saying that everybody is corrupt, that you should leave all of your luxuries. He organizes a lot of people that are, of course, supporting him to get around and find out who is being corrupt around the city. He's going to organize the very unfamous, I would say, infamous, I'm saying, probably I don't know how to pronounce that one, but the bonfire of the vanities. So everybody would have to turn in all of the luxurious items that they have. So necklaces, earrings, probably makeup, books that were not religious, any paintings that were not Christian themes. And the story goes that Botticelli is going to turn in and he's going to burn some of the paintings that he had done. The ones that were already in other hands, like the ones that were owned by the Medici, they were, of course, not put into the bonfire because they had it in their own private houses. But supposedly, Botticelli and many other artists are going to burn also their work because they were not religious topics. And Botticelli starts, and of course, these are many different ways of interpreting. Botticelli starts to change the way that he paints. Much more representations of religious topics, less mythological subjects, and he changes the way that he is going to represent or the topics that he's going to make. The Medici are going to lose power, but at the end, the Pope is going to organize for the people in Florence and for the religious orders in Florence to have a trial against Savonarola. And finally, they're going to hang him and they're going to burn him. And still today, in the Piazza della Signoria, there is a peg on the floor where it says this is the place where he was hung. So Savonarola affected the work of many artists at the time. Any questions and comments? Yes, go ahead.
Didn't Botticelli lose a lot of his patrons by siding with Savonarola?
Well, let me tell you what happened. A lot of the patrons, not the Medici, were supporting also Savonarola. So he did not lose any of that. Michelangelo comes later. Savonarola was no longer alive,
He believed that.
but Michelangelo was very religious. Yeah. Any other comments? Yes.
Did some people just sort of silently go along because they were petrified of what was happening there?
Probably they were just following whatever was happening and they did not know any better. But a lot of people would follow Savonarola. They thought that the church was really corrupt, which it was,
Yeah.
which it was. And it makes sense to go back and feel like a cleanse.
Like Martin Luther King.
Exactly, the same idea, that you feel that there's a lot of corruption and you wanna be purified. And there are several ways of interpreting it. We interpret it with the idea of art and mythology, but if you think about it, it's not that so far-fetched or so wrong. You think about just about the Borgias with all of the popes that had mistresses and a lot of wealth because they would get, of course, money for that. Let me just see, don't leave, if anybody at home has any questions, and then we're gonna end up, let me just see the questions. Botticelli looks like a warrior. I'm sorry I didn't get that. Well, thank you, everyone, and I'm gonna stop I'm sorry.
I think probably people feared for saying anything